Okay, so I have two articles for you. One is very bad news, and the other is good news. Well, tempered good news. So let's start with the bad news because I was going to do this article and then I got breaking news about the good news. So, yeah, starting with the bad news. Abortion pills will be controlled substances in Louisiana soon. Doctors have concerns. Now, for those who'd forgotten, because I haven't done a video about this since May, um, the sponsor of this bill did this because his wanted to consider abortion pills to be controlled substances because his sister was tricked by her ex-husband into taking these pills. So the party that claims that Democrats think that guns have a mind of their own and humans have nothing to do with it are the same people who are claiming that abortion pills just force themselves down a woman's gullet. Even though it was the ex-husband who caused this, and technically the abortion pill did its job, but it's not like it just forced its way into the woman's system. But anyway, so yeah, let's not charge him with a crime. Let's just make sure no woman can get an abortion. But anyway, to the article. On Tuesday, Louisiana will become the first state in the U.S. to categorize two widely used abortion pills as controlled dangerous substances. Now, the Tuesday they are referring to is tomorrow, October 1st. As of this recording, that's tomorrow. All right. Opponents argue the classification could have catastrophic impacts in a state that already has a near total abortion ban and one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the nation. And there was a study, and I think I did a video on this. There was a study that shows that yes, maternal mortality rates have gone up in areas where there are abortion bans because it's almost like the whole point of an abortion is to keep the woman alive. Who would have thunk? Not the people who refuse to accept that abortions aren't just happening because women just think it's a fun thing to do, or that we're talking about loose women who just use this as birth control or whatever myth you believe in. No, there's a reason for these things happening. All right. Let's see. Doctors fear the reclassification will cause delays in accessing the drugs, mifepristone and misoprostol, which together can be used to manage miscarriages. Notice they didn't say the word abortion. Manage miscarriages. But nobody seems to care about that little fact because, obviously, who cares if a woman has a miscarriage and needs help getting rid of this tissue that could get infected? Why should politicians think of that? Oh, I get it. I know. How about they don't and just let the doctors decide what healthcare is? While misoprostol induces labor and treats severe bleeding after delivery. Again, a perfectly good use for the drug. If I wouldn't expect politicians to think of what other uses these drugs have because they're not doctors. Again, Let the doctors be doctors, and you guys leave women's healthcare alone. They also worry the practice of reclassifying the drugs might spread beyond Louisiana. Yes, that is a good concern to have, because there are other states that are douche nuggets. Proponents say the new law should help prevent coerced abortion. See, I told you about this. Pointing to a Texas case in which a pregnant woman was given 7 misoprostol pills by her husband without her knowledge. The baby survived. Over the past 15 years, news outlets have reported on similar cases, none in Louisiana, but the issue does not appear widespread. So again, to reiterate, there was a woman whose husband, or probably soon to be ex-husband, tried to induce an abortion in her for whatever reason. But it's not the husband who should be punished. It should be the drugs. Because, I'm sorry, coerced abortions will happen whether people have access to these drugs or not. Just like abortions will continue to happen even if there's a total ban, because women will just have to do the classic alleyway abortion with a coat hanger. So, abortions will still happen, and in this case, men will force women to have abortions. Even if they can't do it the elegant way of giving her drugs, they could just beat her senseless in hopes that they hit her in the stomach hard enough that they kill the baby. But that does not mean that these drugs should not be accessible at all. These are the same people. I assume these are the same people who were on the side of the domestic abuser in the Supreme Court case, where the Supreme Court said that no, domestic abusers should not have access to guns. These schmucks probably would say yes. Because apparently men should have access to guns, and can shoot a woman, but forcing her to have an abortion, that's beyond the pale. Okay. Alright. Mifepristone and misoprostol can both be obtained through a prescription in Louisiana, but the state has reclassified the pills as Schedule IV drugs, putting them in the same category as the opioid, tramadol, and other substances that can be addictive. Yes, abortion pills can totally be addictive. Sure, whatever. Again, all this because there are men who are jackasses. Okay, so an abortion was coerced. How are banning these drugs going to prevent that? Instead, men are just going to kill the woman instead of forcing her to have an abortion. Yeah, that sounds great. Mifepristone is typically taken along with misoprostol and was approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration in 2000 after federal regulators deemed it safe and effective for ending pregnancies in the early weeks of gestation. The drug, which blocks the hormone progesterone, also primes the uterus to respond to the contraction-causing effects of misoprostol. Last year in the U.S., nearly 2/3 of all abortions were medication abortions. OBGYNs say a tiny fraction of patients suffer major or serious adverse effects after taking mifepristone. In June, the Supreme Court unanimously preserved access to the drug. throwing out a lawsuit from abortion opponents that argued the FDA overlooked serious safety problems when it made mifepristone easier to obtain. Because as we all know, a plucky band of politicians know much more about science than scientists. Medical experts say it's possible and safe to use misoprostol by itself to end a pregnancy, but it's slightly less effective than the two-drug regimen. Besides being used in reproductive care, misoprostol is also used to prevent stomach ulcers in people who take certain pain medicines. So that's something I didn't know. And again, imagine that, a drug that can do multiple things that isn't an abortion. So that explains why the husband in question didn't succeed in his abortion plans, because he just gave her misoprostol. 7 pills of them, but still. Will people face jail time if they use or distribute or possess the pills? It depends. Under current Louisiana law, physicians convicted of performing an illegal abortion, including one with pills, face up to 15 years in prison, $200,000 in fines, and the loss of their medical license. The new classification means that if someone knowingly possesses mifepristone or misoprostol without a valid prescription for any purpose, they could be fined up to $5,000 and sent to jail for 1 to 5 years. The law carves out protections for pregnant women who obtain the drug without a prescription to take on their own. I'm sorry, if this drug is so dangerous, then why are we punishing women for taking this under the care of a doctor, but if they do it on their own, it's okay? How does that make sense? Louisiana Attorney General Liz Murrill, a Republican who supports the current abortion ban and reclassification, said in September that the intentional delivery of these drugs by organizations operating through the internet or other networks is illegal and they will be prosecuted. All right, so doctors say the law could harm patients due to extra steps and more stringent storage requirements, especially in emergencies in which misoprostol is used to manage dangerous postpartum hemorrhages. As soon as the clock strikes midnight, this will be a reality almost immediately because we call for it in an emergency situation so frequently, said Dr. Jane Martin, an OBGYN at Ochsner Health in New Orleans, whose hospital sees up to 5,000 births a year. It's administered at least once a day on labor and delivery, often more frequently. Because again, we've got to prevent abortion, so all the other good things that these drugs are used for, well, that's just collateral damage. Who cares if the woman hemorrhages? I mean, what could possibly go wrong with that, right? In hospitals like hers, misoprostol is usually stored in an OBGYN unit in a hemorrhage box in the room, or on the delivery table, or in a nurse's pocket, said Martin, who is active in the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists in Louisiana, and stressed that she's speaking for herself and not the hospital. With the new law, there will be more red tape to access the drugs, maybe down the hall in a locked container or potentially an in-house pharmacy at smaller hospitals. Health experts said 2 alternative medications for hemorrhage have more side effects, can't be used in patients with certain medical problems, and need to be refrigerated. Murrill countered that the law does not limit a healthcare provider's ability to use, prescribe, or fill these medications for legitimate health purposes, nor does it impose restrictive burdens on access for emergency purposes. Except for the fact that it could be that emergency purpose could be that icky abortion, right? Seriously, how does the law decide that? I mean, again, this brings me back to that case in Texas where a woman went through Kate Cox, she went through the correct procedures, and the Supreme Court still upheld that it's not an emergency. So, that's all well and good that this is supposed to be, that the law allows for emergency access, but if a doctor does this and somebody takes umbrage to it, it'll be up to a bunch of freaking lawyers to decide whether it was actually an emergency. How about we don't take that step? We just let doctors decide. Dr. Kylie Cooper, a maternal fetal specialist in Minnesota who is active with the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, said that she's concerned other states will adopt restrictions like Louisiana. Up to 5% of obstetric patients will experience postpartum hemorrhages, which cause 11% of maternal deaths in the U.S., according to the Joint Commission, a nonprofit organization that sets standards and accredits healthcare organizations. Patients can lose a large amount of blood in a very, very short time frame, Cooper said, so in many situations, seconds and minutes count. But again, that's a small price to pay to prevent people from having abortions, which, according to this law, women who take it on their own, that's perfectly fine. I'm sorry, how are you preventing abortions then? Either you want to prevent them or you don't. It's like the whole point is to punish doctors for being doctors and knowing more about medicine than they do at this point. I just don't understand it. But anyway, let us get to the good news. And the good news is judge strikes down Georgia ban on abortions, allowing them to resume beyond 6 weeks into pregnancy, which is great news because, as has been mentioned many times, most women don't even know they're pregnant at 6 weeks, because 6 weeks just refers to the time after your last period. It does not refer to true 6 weeks gestation, because, the only way doctors can, especially at that early stage, can figure it out is when was your last period. So I'm sure later on they can, at least I'm assuming that they can narrow it down to the correct time. But that's why, someone can say your due date is here, and your due date could end up early or late. And that has nothing to do with the baby saying, I want out. All right. A Georgia judge on Monday struck down the state's abortion law, which took effect in 2022 and effectively prohibited abortions beyond about 6 weeks of pregnancy. Fulton County Superior Court Judge Robert McBurney wrote in his order that liberty in Georgia includes in its meaning, in its protections, and in its bundles of rights the power of a woman to control her own body, to decide what happens to it and in it, and reject state interference with her health care choices. When the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022 and ended a national right to abortion, it opened the door for state bans. 14 states now ban abortion at all stages of pregnancy, with some exceptions. Georgia was one of 4 where the bans kicked in after about the first 6 weeks of pregnancy, which is often before women realize they're pregnant. The impact of bans has been felt deeply in the South because many people have to travel hundreds of miles to states where abortion procedures can be obtained legally. Georgia's law was passed by state lawmakers and signed by Republican Governor Brian Kemp in 2019, but had been blocked from taking effect until the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, which had protected the right to an abortion for nearly 50 years. The law prohibited most abortions once a detectable human heartbeat was present. Cardiac activity can be detected by ultrasounds in cells within an embryo that will eventually become the heart around 6 weeks into pregnancy. Okay, so it's not even a heart yet. It could potentially be a heart, but it isn't one yet. So these people think that a potential heart is good enough. Even though anything can happen still. It's not like it's a viable fetus that can survive outside the womb. It's just a bunch of heart cells that at some point is going to become a heart. Okay, well, that's great. It could also, not properly get together and form a proper heart. And so the fetus is never reaches the state of viability. You can't know that this fetus will eventually become viable. So why are you telling women at what point that they have to stop thinking about themselves? It's literally their body. It's growing in their body. And until viability, which then gets a little messy because apparently shit can still go wrong, but until the fetus is viable, what are you protecting? Okay, let's see here. McBurney wrote that his ruling means the law in the state returns to what it was before the law was passed in 2019. When a fetus growing inside a woman reaches viability, when society can assume care and responsibility for that separate life, then and only then may society intervene, McBurney wrote. And that makes sense. Again, sometimes horrible things happen, but viability, that sounds like a reasonable benchmark. An arbitrary 6-week ban on abortions is inconsistent with these rights and the proper balance that a viability rule establishes between a woman's right of liberty and privacy and society's interest in protecting and caring for unborn infants, the order says. All right, so that is all I have on that article. Ugh. So that was a quick one, but yeah. So at least we're ending this video on a good note. So with that, I will see you guys in the next video.